Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT14 and kind of doing a tier list predictions on what I actually think is going to end up doing well in the BT14 environment. So there is a couple of things that we can go over before we actually get into the nitty-gritty of the tier list, and that's taking a look at where we were coming from. So we're just coming off of the BT13 and RB1 format with starter decks 15 and 16, and here is the top 21 decks in that format. The top 8 decks is what we saw the most of, and then 9 through 21 are decks that still topped but weren't doing as well as the current top 8. So we could use that information and then take a look and infer on some of the Japanese information that we have available to us to kind of collate what is going to remain good and what is going to be coming out that is looking to be good, and why those decks are going to be performing as well as they are. So we do have to note that there are just differences in the Japanese format versus the English format based off of not only just how we play, but also the card pool that we had available to us. So in their BT14 format, they also had the LM01 cards and promos that we don't necessarily have in English yet, but we also do have changes in addition to that to the ban and restriction list. So this is just what their top 12 decks were, and that doesn't necessarily mean that all of these aren't going to be true for us. It's just some of the strengths and weaknesses are going to be a little bit different based on the changes to the format. So as far as the tier list goes, let's just start with the bottom. So the bottom of the tier list is going to be the rogue decks. These are decks that basically just don't necessarily top as often as some of the other decks, but still sometimes can perform well. There are some things that are just holding the decks back, but they're still relatively playable. So the 3 that I'm just going to be highlighting real quickly is going to be Machinedramon, Security Control, and Belphmon. Everything else that isn't necessarily going to be a top tier list is also going to be labeled as Rogue. So as far as the reasons behind Machinedramon, Security Control, and Belphmon as the highlights, Belphmon was one of the top decks, but with the limitations that are now put on Eismon and the BT02 Gabumon, it does severely limit and hinder how much the deck is able to cycle through itself to be able to set itself up. And Belphmon isn't advancing as a deck as a whole, which is why it's going to be held back a bit and why I think it's going to get put into the rogue category, just because the attention is going to be on other purple decks. Security Control is in that same style of manner, where it is still just a very strong deck, but it hasn't already topped a whole lot, so I don't expect it just because they get a new Magnet Angemon to coincide with the one that they already were running. The deck is reasonably going to change that much. Then Machinedramon also has had some time struggling. Anytime we do get new cyborgs, it's always a good time to look at the deck, and we did just get a whole bunch of new cyborgs from the starter deck, and we are getting a little bit of new cyborgs in BT14, but nothing too crazy enough to really propel the deck forward. But again, the training card might just be enough to help it shore up some of the consistency issues that the deck has already had. Now, going into the tournament contenders, these are going to be decks that top, but not as frequently as what the top decks are, or some of the more tournament-worthy decks. So I do think that Red Hybrids, even though it is a very strong deck, it doesn't really grow or advance as much, and therefore its capacity is limited on how well the deck can perform. Jessamon is looking to be in a pretty good spot, but right now it's currently unknown how well the deck is actually going to do in the long run. So BT06 Savior Huckmon is definitely going to make it Jessamon a lot stronger than it was before, and it's going to be going through quite a bit of changes, but it's going to take some time to figure out what the deck is capable of and all of its matchups now that the limitation on that card is unrestricted. I also do think that Black War Greymon OTK is going to be another really strong deck just because it's utilizing the majority of the red-black Greymon engine, and it's just utilizing the promo top end to be able to deal lots of damage relatively quickly, and the red-black Greymon engine is getting a couple of new cards in BT14, so that might help the deck perform a little bit better, but this currently, right now, is just one of the best dedicated OTK-based decks that we have in the game. Then Ulforce is another really decent tournament contending deck. Again, it's not really getting a whole lot of updates in terms of what it's trying to do outside of the training card, but sometimes those consistency boosts can do wonders for various different decks. And I also think that's another similar reason why Beelzemon is going to be another tournament contender. It's still just a very strong deck, and the mill strategy versus the draw and discard based strategy didn't get affected at all, so Belphemon players might be looking to swap over to a different purple deck, and Beelzemon is still looking to be one of the better purple decks. Then, as far as tournament worthy, these are some of the better decks that just don't top as much as the top tier decks. So I do think that for the type of environment that we're about to get into, Blue Flares is looking to be a very strong deck, especially if they're going to start thinking about incorporating some blue hybrid cards. I don't necessarily know how well blue hybrids is going to be as a whole. During my initial testing, it seems like a fair deck, but fair sometimes isn't good enough in order to make a deck super strong, but it still has a lot of good tech and tools that Blue Flares could try to take advantage of to try to help propel itself forward, and Blue Flares is a deck that likes to take advantage of decks that like to go wide, which some of the top decks tend to do. Which leads us to Royal Knights. Royal Knights already was just a pretty strong deck as of BT13, and it's still looking to be strong, but this deck isn't getting any updates, so it's probably going to fall down the waterfall a little bit and still be a strong deck for you to play with a whole bunch of different tech and tools that you could try to splash and incorporate, but I don't necessarily see this deck being absolutely as insane as it once was. But I just think that the attention is not necessarily going to be put onto this deck as a result. And I think Hunters is in that similar type of position where it's not really getting any additions to the deck, and the deck really isn't changing outside of the small changes that it needs to make to adapt to the meta, but it does have the tools to be able to kind of do that, and it's still just looking to be another very strong and powerful deck still. Then as far as some of the newer decks, D-Brigade is looking to be in a pretty good position just because it gets a new line and it gets a new trait that it can start to interact with to further enhance what D-Brigade was already doing. And I do think that this update is going to be meaningful enough, and I do think that there's going to be enough fanfare on the deck to help propel itself forward. And I think that as one of the best standalone yellow decks, Yellow Vaccine is also looking to be pretty strong. I don't necessarily think it's going to be that insane considering there was the limitation to the Geo Greymon, but even without the Geo Greymon, it still has a really powerful strategy, being able to utilize its security differently than anything else in the game, while there's still a lot of very powerful Yellow Vaccine traded Digimon for it to be interacting with, on top of the fact that it could just straight up hose based on matchups anything that's utilizing virus-based Digimon. And then the last deck on the tournament worthy list is going to be Mirage Gaugamon. So Mirage Gaugamon, even though he did get his best card limited, the deck is still just looking to be very strong, and we do have substitutions for the loss, and the fact that we do get some meaningful updates for the deck, thanks to the training cards adding extra consistency, which the deck was kind of lacking before, on top of that speed boost. It's also getting the most important egg for blue to be playing around with, which is going to be the Loogamon egg, so that way you could try to have easy access at jamming, freeing up deck space, just because now you don't need to run the Nikolai, and then you could use that deck space for some more meaningful cards. So even though the OTK combo is going to be a little bit harder, and you could potentially miss certain timings because of how the level 5s work, it's still just looking to be another very strong and powerful deck just because of those few meaningful updates. And then when it comes to the top tier decks, these are the decks that I think are going to be topping more often than any other deck in the game. So I still think that Shine Greymon is going to be a very powerful deck just because it, well, is already one of the best decks we currently have. And even though it is going to be suffering from the Geo Greymon limitation, I do think that because of the training boosts, we do have enough cards to be able to replace what we're losing with Geo Greymon with adding some extra consistency in speed in other areas of the deck, even though we won't be able to set up our tamers for free out of our security. I also think that Bloomlord is going to be one of the more popular and more powerful decks just because it's already performing super strong and it actually is getting more direct support with the Mimi stuff that's going to be coming out in BT14, even though it's not going to be utilizing all of it. Just the fact that it gets even more tech and tools to play around with is going to help propel the deck forward. We unfortunately, unlike Japan, don't have access to the LM cards, which one of the level 6s was going to be used, but I still think that even without Quantumon, it's still going to be a very powerful deck just because of everything else that it already is getting. And then I still think that Red-Black Greymon, more specifically Black War Greymon, is going to be a very powerful deck just because we are getting more Greymon-based tools in BT14 for us to be playing around with. Even though most of those tools are more focused on War Greymon, the fact that Black War Greymon also has access at those tools, while War Greymon is still utilizing the exact same low end and the exact same engine, just makes Red-Black Greymon still one of the best decks to be playing around with. And then as far as the last top tier deck, I do think that Loogamon is going to be positioning itself to be one of the best decks in the current format. It does have a reasonable amount of strength to it to be able to basically do what Metal Garurumon was attempting to do, just a little bit better because you have a whole bunch of different tools that you're playing around with, thanks to the fact that you're utilizing Sons of Chaos cards, which are going to be introduced in the set, and you're going to be utilizing Dark Animal support, which allows you to be able to digivolve from your trash, so you have alternative means at being able to utilize your cards to increase the overall efficiency and consistency on what the deck is trying to do, while multi-attacking with Security Attack Plus, and being able to play out and spawn extra bodies to then be able to use to either further aggress or use as an extra resource. Just makes the deck look and be positioned to be one of the best. But that's everything I have in terms of where I think the BT14 format is going to be. Again, this is just my early impressions based on the changes that we have from the Japanese version to the English version and all of the English data that we have based on how we're going to be playing and what I think is going to be doing well. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.